25 years ago, Catherine Whitmore disappeared after boarding the family's luxury yacht for what should have been a celebration cruise, leaving no traces behind. The vanishing of the young heiress plunged the prestigious Whitmore family into unimaginable tragedy and depression, while New York's high society was left in complete confusion. The police considered various possibilities: kidnapping, accident, suicide, but couldn't solve the crime, causing outrage in a family that never lost hope. Fighting for the truth to come to light became their only reason to continue living. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and proof. Catherine Elizabeth Whitmore wasn't just another wealthy young woman from Manhattan's Upper East Side. She was the sole heir to the Whitmore shipping empire, a fortune built over 3 generations that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless economic storms. Her grandfather, Theodore Whitmore Sr., had started with a single cargo vessel in 1923. By 1987, the family controlled one of the largest private shipping fleets on the East Coast, worth an estimated $200 million. But wealth couldn't shield Catherine from the suffocating expectations that came with her last name. Friends described her as intelligent yet melancholic, a young woman who felt trapped in a golden cage. She had graduated magna cum laude from Vassar College with a degree in art history, but her father, Theodore Whitmore Jr., insisted she join the family business immediately. The pressure was relentless. Board meetings, charity galas, arranged introductions to suitable young men from other wealthy families. Catherine's only escape was art. She spent hours in her private studio in the family's Fifth Avenue penthouse, painting abstract pieces that reflected her inner turmoil. Her works were dark, filled with blues and grays that seemed to capture the loneliness of someone surrounded by luxury but starved of genuine connection. Her art teacher, Professor Margaret Chen, later told investigators that Catherine's paintings had grown increasingly somber in the months before her disappearance. The yacht trip was supposed to be different. For once, Catherine had convinced her father to let her invite her own guests, college friends who knew her as Katie, not as the Whitmore heiress. The plan was simple: a 3-day cruise along the Connecticut coast aboard the family's 120-foot yacht, Prosperity. It would be her 22nd birthday celebration, delayed by 2 months due to her father's business commitments. On September 15, 1987, 8 young people boarded the yacht at the Manhattan harbor. Catherine seemed genuinely happy for the first time in months, according to her best friend Sarah Mitchell. She wore a flowing white dress and her grandmother's pearl necklace, laughing as she welcomed everyone aboard. The crew consisted of Captain Robert Hayes, a family employee for over 15 years, and 2 deckhands, James Morrison and Michael Torres. The first day passed without incident. The group sailed to Mystic, Connecticut, where they docked for the night. Catherine organized games, led conversations about art and literature, and seemed to be the perfect hostess. Sarah Mitchell would later tell police that Catherine had mentioned feeling finally free for the first time in years. But freedom, for someone like Catherine Whitmore, was a dangerous illusion in a world where family legacy and social expectations held more power than personal desires. As the yacht cut through the dark waters of Long Island Sound that September night, none of the passengers could have imagined that they were about to become witnesses to one of New York's most enduring mysteries. The investigation that would follow would expose the dark underbelly of America's elite, revealing that even in the most privileged circles, trust could be the deadliest weapon of all. The second day of the cruise began with an ominous change in Catherine's demeanor. What had started as a joyful birthday celebration slowly transformed into something much darker, as tensions aboard the Prosperity began to surface in ways no one could have anticipated. Sarah Mitchell recalled that Catherine seemed distracted during breakfast, constantly checking her watch and glancing toward the shore. When asked if everything was all right, Catherine simply smiled and said she was expecting some important news that day. The group had planned to sail to Block Island, but Catherine suddenly announced a change of plans. They would anchor in a secluded cove near Montauk Point instead. The decision puzzled everyone. Block Island had restaurants, shops, and nightlife that would have been perfect for a group of young people. But Catherine insisted on the isolated location, claiming she wanted privacy for what comes next. Her friend Jennifer Walsh later told investigators that Catherine's choice of words seemed strange, almost ominous. By afternoon, the atmosphere aboard the yacht had shifted dramatically. Catherine received a phone call around 3 p.m., one of the few that could reach the yacht through the ship's radio system. Captain Hayes, who handled the communication, said the caller identified himself as a family associate, but refused to give his name. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but Catherine emerged from the communication room visibly shaken. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, Sarah Mitchell testified. All the color had drained from her face, and her hands were trembling. When I asked what was wrong, she just said that some things can't be avoided forever. The evening brought an elaborate dinner that Catherine had specifically requested from the yacht's chef. She insisted on using the finest china, the best wines from her father's collection, and even brought out a set of antique silver candlesticks that belonged to her grandmother. To her friends, it felt like a farewell dinner, though none of them understood why. During the meal, Catherine made a series of toasts that, in retrospect, seemed like goodbye speeches. She thanked each friend individually, mentioning specific memories and expressing how much their friendship had meant to her. "You've given me something my family's money never could," she said, raising her wineglass. "You've let me be myself." The most chilling moment came when Catherine stood to make a final toast. "To truth," she said, her voice steady but her eyes filled with tears. "May it always find a way to surface, no matter how deep it's buried." The friends exchanged confused glances, but they drank to her words, not knowing they would become prophetic. After dinner, the group gathered on the upper deck to watch the sunset. Catherine sat apart from the others, staring out at the horizon with an intensity that made several people uncomfortable. Around 9 p.m., she announced she was tired and would be retiring to her cabin early. This was unusual for Catherine, who typically stayed up late during social gatherings. "She hugged each of us good night," Jennifer Walsh remembered. But they weren't normal hugs. They lasted too long, and she whispered, "Thank you" to each of us. It felt like she was saying goodbye forever. The last person to see Catherine alive was Michael Torres, one of the deckhands, who spotted her on the lower deck around 11:30 p.m. She was still wearing her white dinner dress, but had added a dark blue shawl. She appeared to be waiting for someone, checking her watch repeatedly and looking toward the water. She seemed nervous, Torres later told police. She kept looking at the shore like she was expecting a boat or something. When I asked if she needed anything, she just smiled and said she was waiting for the truth to come aboard. By morning, Catherine Whitmore was gone. Her cabin showed no signs of struggle. Her bed had been slept in, her clothes were neatly folded, but she had vanished as completely as if the ocean had swallowed her whole. The only thing missing, besides Catherine herself, was the antique pearl necklace she had worn to dinner, a family heirloom worth over $100,000. The Coast Guard search that followed would find no trace of the missing heiress, launching one of the most extensive maritime investigations in New York history. The morning of September 17, 1987, brought panic aboard the Prosperity. When Catherine failed to appear for breakfast, her friends initially assumed she was sleeping off the previous evening's wine. But when Sarah Mitchell went to check on her at 10 a.m., she found Catherine's cabin empty, the bed made, and an ominous silence that would haunt everyone aboard for the rest of their lives. Captain Hayes immediately radioed the Coast Guard, while the crew began a systematic search of every inch of the 120-foot yacht. They checked storage compartments, engine rooms, even the small spaces where someone might hide or accidentally become trapped. The search revealed nothing except Catherine's diamond earrings on her nightstand and a half-finished painting in her cabin, a seascape so dark and turbulent it seemed to predict the storm about to engulf the Whitmore family. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing which places and at what moments of day or night these documentary reports reach. The Coast Guard response was immediate and massive. Within 2 hours, 3 cutters, 2 helicopters, and a specialized search and rescue team were scouring the waters around Montauk Point. The search area covered over 500 square miles of ocean, taking into account currents, weather patterns, and the possibility that Catherine might have fallen overboard during the night. But the investigation quickly revealed troubling inconsistencies. The yacht's security cameras, which should have recorded all deck activity, had mysteriously malfunctioned between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., exactly the window when Catherine had disappeared. The ship's log, normally meticulously maintained by Captain Hayes, was missing the entry for that night. Most disturbing of all, the yacht's tender, a small motorboat used to reach shore, showed signs of recent use, though no one admitted to taking it out. Theodore Whitmore Jr. arrived at the Montauk Harbor by private helicopter, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. The shipping magnate, normally composed and commanding, appeared to age years in a single day. He immediately offered a $500,000 reward for information leading to Catherine's safe return, a sum that would eventually grow to $2 million as weeks passed without any leads. The FBI joined the investigation on the third day, bringing sophisticated sonar equipment and underwater cameras. Special Agent Patricia Coleman, who led the federal task force, later described the case as unlike anything I'd encountered in 20 years of law enforcement. The absence of physical evidence was almost supernatural. No torn clothing, no personal items in the water, no witnesses on nearby vessels. The interrogation of the yacht's passengers and crew began immediately. Each person was questioned separately, their stories compared and analyzed for inconsistencies. Sarah Mitchell broke down during her interview, sobbing as she recounted Catherine's strange behavior the night before. She knew something was going to happen, Sarah insisted. The way she said goodbye to everyone, the things she said about truth surfacing, it was like she was preparing for something terrible. Jennifer Walsh provided perhaps the most crucial testimony. She revealed that Catherine had received 3 phone calls in the weeks leading up to the cruise, each one leaving her more distressed than the last. She said someone from her past was trying to contact her, someone she never wanted to see again. She seemed terrified but also resigned, like she knew she couldn't avoid whatever was coming. The crew members' stories remained remarkably consistent, perhaps too consistent according to some investigators. Captain Hayes, James Morrison and Michael Torres all claimed to have seen nothing unusual after Catherine retired to her cabin. Their alibis checked out. They had been playing cards in the crew quarters until after midnight. But Agent Coleman noted in her report that their testimonies seemed rehearsed and overly coordinated. The search of Catherine's Manhattan penthouse revealed a safe deposit box key hidden in her art supplies. The box, opened in the presence of investigators and family lawyers, contained $50,000 in cash, several fake identification documents, and a handwritten note that simply read, "If something happens to me, look for the truth where it all began." Theodore Whitmore Sr., Catherine's grandfather, provided a crucial piece of information when he mentioned that Catherine had been asking questions about the family's early business dealings. She'd been going through old shipping records, he told investigators, said she was interested in family history, but some of those records, well, let's say the family's fortune wasn't always built on legitimate cargo. As weeks turned to months, the investigation stalled. The Coast Guard officially suspended the search after 45 days, though the family continued funding private search efforts. The FBI kept the case open, but reassigned most agents to other priorities. Catherine Whitmore had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only questions and a family destroyed by grief and uncertainty. The case file would eventually fill 3 large boxes, containing thousands of pages of testimony, photographs, and evidence that led nowhere. But 25 years later, the truth was waiting in the most unlikely place, hidden beneath the very yacht where Catherine had last been seen alive. The disappearance of Catherine Whitmore sent shockwaves through New York's elite social circles, but as months turned to years, the city's attention moved on to newer scandals and tragedies. For the Whitmore family, however, time stood still in September of 1987, trapped in an endless loop of grief, guilt, and unanswered questions. Theodore Whitmore Jr. never recovered from losing his only child. Friends and business associates watched him transform from a commanding industrial leader into a broken man, haunted by what-ifs and could-have-beens. He sold the shipping company in 1992, unable to focus on business, while Catherine's fate remained unknown. The sale, completed for far less than the company's worth, marked the end of 3 generations of Whitmore maritime dominance. The family's Fifth Avenue penthouse became a shrine to Catherine's memory. Her art studio remained exactly as she'd left it, paintbrushes still holding dried paint from her final work. Theodore hired private investigators for over a decade, spending nearly $3 million chasing leads that invariably led nowhere. Psychics, former FBI agents, international missing persons experts, all promised answers that never came. Margaret Whitmore, Catherine's mother, retreated into complete isolation after her daughter's disappearance. She had never been robust mentally, and Catherine's vanishing pushed her into a depression so severe that she required institutionalization twice during the 1990s. She spoke frequently of seeing Catherine in dreams, always wearing that white dress from the last night, always trying to tell her something important that Margaret could never quite understand. The investigation officially remained open, but by 1995, Detective Raymond Walsh, no relation to Catherine's friend Jennifer, was the only officer still actively working the case. He kept Catherine's file on his desk, a constant reminder of the failure that had defined his career. "Every detective has that one case," Walsh later said, "the one that keeps you awake at night, the one that makes you question everything you think you know about human nature." Catherine's college friends tried to maintain normal lives, but the trauma of that September night followed them like a shadow. Sarah Mitchell moved to California and became a therapist, specializing in trauma counseling, a career choice she directly attributed to her friend's disappearance. Jennifer Walsh married young and had children quickly, as if surrounding herself with life could somehow balance the death that had touched her so closely. The yacht Prosperity sat unused in a private marina for years, a floating tomb that Theodore couldn't bring himself to sell, but couldn't bear to board again. The crew had scattered. Captain Hayes retired early and moved to Florida, while the deckhands found work with other wealthy families. None of them ever spoke publicly about that night, maintaining a silence that some investigators found suspicious but could never break. By 2000, media coverage of the Whitmore case had dwindled to occasional anniversary articles in the New York newspapers. The story had become part of the city's mythology. Like Judge Crater or Amelia Earhart, Catherine Whitmore had joined the ranks of famous disappearances that captured public imagination, precisely because they offered no resolution. The family's tragedy deepened in 2003, when Margaret Whitmore died in her sleep at a psychiatric facility in Connecticut. Her final words, according to nursing staff, were about Catherine coming home soon. Theodore buried his wife in the family plot at Woodlawn Cemetery, leaving an empty space beside her for Catherine's eventual return. Theodore himself began showing signs of dementia around 2005, his memories of the investigation becoming confused and contradictory. He would spend hours talking to photographs of Catherine, apologizing for failures both real and imagined. His caretakers reported that he frequently mentioned checking the boat and would become agitated when prevented from visiting the marina. The case files gathered dust in FBI storage facilities, indexed and catalogued, but rarely consulted. New agents learned about the Whitmore disappearance in training seminars as an example of how even the most extensive investigations could yield nothing. It became a cautionary tale about the limitations of law enforcement when faced with a truly perfect crime. But perfect crimes, as investigators know, don't exist. They simply haven't been solved yet. Somewhere in the vast collection of evidence, testimonies and theories surrounding Catherine Whitmore's disappearance, the truth was waiting. It would take a chance discovery 25 years later to finally bring that truth to light. The ocean had kept its secrets for a quarter century, but secrets, like bodies, have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. March 15th, 2012. 25 years to the month after Catherine Whitmore's disappearance, marine salvage expert David Chen received a contract that would change everything. Theodore Whitmore Jr., now 78 and suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease, was being moved to a specialized care facility. His legal guardian, a distant cousin named Robert Whitmore, had decided to finally sell the family's assets, including the yacht Prosperity that had sat unused in a Manhattan marina for over 2 decades. Chen's company, Atlantic Marine Recovery, specialized in preparing abandoned or neglected vessels for sale. What should have been a routine cleaning and inspection job became something far more sinister when Chen's team began exploring the yacht's lower levels. The boat was in remarkable condition considering it had been sitting for 25 years, Chen later told investigators. Someone had been maintaining it, not using it, but definitely keeping it seaworthy. The engines were preserved, the hull was sound, but there was something off about the whole thing. It felt like a tomb. The breakthrough came when Chen's assistant, Maria Santos, noticed an inconsistency in the yacht's blueprint. According to the original 1982 construction documents, the lower deck should have contained a larger storage area. But when they measured the actual space, they found a discrepancy of approximately 8 feet, space that seemed to have vanished from the yacht's layout. Using metal detectors and eventually a small jackhammer, the team discovered a false wall in the engine compartment. Behind it lay a hidden room that hadn't appeared on any official plans, a space roughly the size of a walk-in closet that contained the most shocking discovery in the Whitmore case's 25-year history. The hidden compartment housed a large steel safe, the kind used in banks during the 1940s and 50s. Despite decades in the marine environment, the safe remained intact and locked. More disturbing were the items scattered around it. Women's clothing that had once been white but had yellowed with age, a pearl necklace that matched descriptions of Catherine's grandmother's heirloom, and a collection of photographs that made Chen immediately call the police. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had inherited the Whitmore file when Detective Walsh retired, arrived at the marina within an hour. Rodriguez had studied the case extensively, fascinated by its combination of wealth, mystery, and investigative failure. She immediately recognized the significance of what Chen had found. "The moment I saw that safe and those photographs, I knew we were looking at evidence that had been hidden for 25 years, Rodriguez said. But I also knew that opening it improperly could destroy whatever was inside. This wasn't just about solving a cold case. It was about getting justice for a young woman who had been silenced for over 2 decades. The FBI was called in to handle the safe's opening, using specialized equipment designed to preserve potential evidence. Special Agent Jennifer Park, who now headed the Bureau's Cold Case Division, flew in from Washington to oversee the operation. The anticipation was enormous. After 25 years of dead ends, investigators finally had something concrete to work with. The safe opening was scheduled for March 20, 2012, in the presence of prosecutors, FBI technicians, and forensic specialists. The Whitmore family's attorney was notified, though Theodore Jr. was no longer mentally competent to participate in the investigation. The media, somehow learning of the discovery, gathered outside the marina in numbers not seen since the original disappearance, but the photographs found outside the safe had already provided crucial clues. They showed Catherine Whitmore in what appeared to be distressed circumstances, not the staged society photos the public knew, but candid shots that suggested surveillance or coercion. In several images, she appeared to be meeting with unidentified men in locations that FBI analysts were working to identify. More importantly, the photographs were time-stamped. They had been taken over a period of several months leading up to Catherine's disappearance, suggesting that her vanishing was not spontaneous, but part of a carefully orchestrated plan that had been months in the making. The discovery raised immediate questions about everyone who had access to the yacht. Captain Hayes, the crew members, family associates, and even Catherine's friends came under renewed scrutiny. The hidden compartment had been professionally constructed, requiring both maritime engineering knowledge and access to the vessel during construction or major maintenance. As news of the discovery spread, several people who had remained silent for 25 years began contacting authorities. A former Whitmore family employee came forward with information about unusual modifications made to the yacht in 1986. A marina security guard reported seeing lights on the Prosperity during several nights when the boat was supposedly empty. The safe's contents would provide the final pieces of the puzzle, but even before it was opened, investigators knew they were dealing with something far more sinister than a tragic accident or impulsive crime. The evidence suggested a conspiracy that had been 25 years in the making, a secret that had consumed multiple lives and destroyed one of New York's most prominent families. Catherine Whitmore's voice was finally about to be heard from beyond the grave. March 20, 2012. The opening of the hidden safe aboard the Prosperity drew law enforcement officials, forensic experts, and media representatives from across the country. After 25 years of silence, Catherine Whitmore was about to tell her story from beyond the grave. If this case has already captivated you, leave a like. It helps Catherine Whitmore's story reach more people. The safe, manufactured by Mosler Safe Company in 1954, required nearly 3 hours to open without damaging potential evidence inside. FBI technicians used specialized drilling equipment and fiber optic cameras to navigate the locking mechanism, while forensic photographers documented every step of the process. When the safe door finally swung open, investigators found themselves staring at the most comprehensive confession in criminal history. Catherine Whitmore had left behind not just evidence of her murder, but a detailed account of the corruption and criminal conspiracy that had led to her death. The safe contained dozens of documents, photographs, audio recordings, and a 47-page handwritten letter addressed to whoever finds this first. Catherine's letter, written in her distinctive handwriting and verified by forensic document experts, revealed a web of criminal activity that reached the highest levels of New York society and explained why she had been marked for death. "If you are reading this," the letter began, "it means I am dead, and someone finally found the courage to look for the truth. My name is Catherine Elizabeth Whitmore, and I was murdered because I discovered that my family's fortune was built on blood, drugs, and human misery stretching back 40 years. The letter detailed Catherine's discovery that the Whitmore shipping empire had been a front for drug smuggling operations since the 1960s. Her grandfather, Theodore Whitmore Sr., had partnered with Colombian cartels to transport cocaine into New York Harbor, using the family's legitimate cargo vessels. The operation had generated hundreds of millions in illegal profits, money that had been laundered through real estate investments, art purchases, and charitable foundations. Catherine had stumbled upon this information while researching family history for what she thought would be a simple genealogy project. Bank records, shipping manifests, and correspondence hidden in her grandfather's personal papers revealed decades of criminal activity. Most shocking of all, her own father, Theodore Jr., had not only known about the operation, but had expanded it significantly during the 1980s. The audio recordings in the safe were even more damning. Catherine had secretly recorded conversations with her father, grandfather, and several family associates, documenting their discussions of drug shipments, money laundering techniques, and the elimination of potential witnesses. The recordings, made over a period of 6 months before her disappearance, showed Catherine's growing horror as she realized the extent of her family's criminal enterprise. "I confronted my father on September 10th, Catherine's letter continued. "I told him I knew everything and demanded that he end the operation immediately. He laughed at me. He said I was naive, that our entire lifestyle depended on this money, and that I would never be allowed to destroy what 3 generations had built. That's when I knew I was going to die." The most chilling revelation came in the letter's final pages. Catherine described receiving death threats and being followed by unknown men in the weeks before the cruise. She realized that the birthday celebration had been arranged not to make her happy, but to provide the perfect cover for her murder. The isolated location, the loyal crew, the convenient camera malfunction, everything had been orchestrated by her own father. "The cruelest part," Catherine wrote, "is that Daddy made me complicit in planning my own execution. He asked me to choose the location, to invite my friends, to make it seem like a celebration. I realize now that he wanted witnesses who would describe how happy I seemed, how normal everything appeared. My friends' testimonies would support the theory that I committed suicide or had an accident. The evidence in the safe included financial records showing payments to Captain Hayes and the crew members, ensuring their silence and cooperation. Phone records revealed extensive communication between Theodore Jr. and known criminal associates in the days leading up to Catherine's disappearance. Most damaging of all were photographs showing the construction of the hidden compartment in 1986, supervised by Theodore Jr. himself. The safe also contained Catherine's will, written just days before her death, in which she left her entire inheritance to various charities and specifically excluded her father from receiving any portion of her estate. She had also prepared detailed instructions for authorities, including the locations of additional evidence hidden in various family properties. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was a collection of letters Catherine had written to her future children, children she knew she would never have. In these letters, she apologized for the family legacy she couldn't escape and expressed hope that someday the truth would emerge and justice would be served. "I know I'm going to die," she wrote in her final letter, dated September 14, 1987. "Tomorrow night on that yacht, surrounded by my friends who have no idea they're about to become witnesses to murder. But I also know that someday, someone will find this safe and the truth will finally surface. Daddy thinks he's buried the evidence forever, but the dead don't stay buried when justice demands they speak." The evidence was overwhelming, but the passage of 25 years had complicated any potential prosecution. Theodore Whitmore Sr. had died in 1998, taking his secrets to the grave. Theodore Jr., now suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease, was legally incompetent to stand trial. Captain Hayes had died of a heart attack in 2009, while one of the deckhands had been killed in an unrelated incident in 2005. But Catherine's evidence reached beyond her immediate family, implicating dozens of associates, business partners, and corrupt officials who had enabled the operation for decades. The FBI launched one of the largest organized crime investigations in New York history, following money trails and criminal connections that stretched from Manhattan penthouses to Colombian coca fields. The young woman who had been silenced for 25 years was finally telling her story, and her voice was loud enough to bring down an empire built on lies and blood. The revelation of Catherine Whitmore's evidence triggered the largest organized crime investigation in New York since the commission trials of the 1980s. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Park assembled a task force of over 50 agents, prosecutors, and forensic accountants to follow the money trails and criminal connections that Catherine had so meticulously documented before her death. The scope of the Whitmore criminal enterprise shocked even seasoned investigators. Bank records hidden in the safe revealed that between 1965 and 1987, the family's shipping company had laundered over $800 million in drug proceeds. The operation had involved not just the Whitmore family, but dozens of corrupt officials, legitimate businessmen, and criminal organizations across multiple countries. Catherine's recordings proved particularly devastating to several prominent New York figures who had considered themselves untouchable. One tape captured a conversation between Theodore Jr. and federal judge Martin Rosenberg, in which the judge discussed dismissing drug-related cases in exchange for $200,000 payments. Another recording revealed that State Senator Patricia Morrison had been receiving monthly bribes to prevent legislative oversight of harbor security measures. The investigation quickly spread beyond New York. Catherine's evidence included shipping manifests and financial records that implicated port officials in Miami, New Orleans, and Baltimore. Colombian authorities, provided with detailed information about the cartel connections, began their own investigations that led to the arrests of several high-ranking drug lords who had worked with the Whitmore organization for decades. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of a murder ledger hidden in a safety deposit box, whose location Catherine had provided in her written instructions. The ledger, written in Theodore Sr.'s handwriting, documented the elimination of at least 12 individuals who had threatened the operation between 1968 and 1985. The victims included a Coast Guard investigator, 2 former employees, and a journalist who had been investigating harbor corruption. The ledger entries were chillingly clinical. J.M. Harbor Pilot, too curious about cargo manifests, handled 7/15/73. Each entry included the victims' initials, their perceived threat level, and the date they were handled. Catherine Whitmore's entry, the last in the ledger, was written in Theodore Jr.'s hand. KW knows everything. Eliminate during cruise, 9/17/87. The FBI began the grim task of investigating these historical murders, many of which had been classified as accidents or suicides at the time they occurred. Advanced forensic techniques allowed investigators to re-examine evidence that had been stored for decades, and in several cases, they found proof of homicide that had been missed by earlier investigations. The corruption extended into law enforcement itself. Catherine's evidence revealed that Detective Michael Santos, who had worked the original investigation into her disappearance, had been receiving payments from the Whitmore family. Santos had deliberately misdirected the investigation away from family members and had suppressed evidence that might have led to the discovery of the hidden safe. Santos, now retired, was arrested at his Florida home and charged with obstruction of justice and accessory to murder. Captain Robert Hayes, despite being deceased, became a central figure in the investigation. Catherine's recordings revealed that Hayes had been recruited by the family in 1975, specifically because of his willingness to participate in criminal activities. Bank records showed regular payments to Hayes that far exceeded his salary as a yacht captain. Most damning of all, Catherine had recorded a conversation in which Hayes discussed the logistics of her murder, including his plan to claim she had fallen overboard during the night. The surviving crew members, James Morrison and Michael Torres, were located and arrested within a week of the safe's opening. Both men, now in their 60s, initially maintained their innocence, but eventually broke under interrogation when confronted with Catherine's recordings. Morrison revealed that Catherine had been drugged during dinner on her last night, making her unconscious but not killing her immediately. Torres admitted that they had taken Catherine's unconscious body ashore using the yacht's tender, where she was strangled by an unknown associate before her body was disposed of in a pre-dug grave in a Connecticut forest. The location of Catherine's remains became the focus of an intensive search. Using GPS coordinates found in her evidence cache, investigators began excavating a remote area near Old Lyme, Connecticut. After 3 days of searching, they found human remains buried 6 feet deep in a grave that had been carefully concealed for 25 years. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains were those of Catherine Whitmore. The cause of death was strangulation, consistent with Torres's confession. She was still wearing remnants of the white dress she had worn to her last dinner, along with the pearl necklace that had been reported missing. The necklace had been left with her body as a cruel reminder of the family wealth that had ultimately caused her death. Theodore Whitmore Jr., despite his dementia, was formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Legal experts debated whether he could be declared competent to stand trial, but the question became moot when he died of a stroke in his care facility just 6 weeks after the charges were filed. His death certificate listed the cause as acute cerebrovascular accident, but those who knew him believed he had simply lost the will to live once his crimes were exposed. The investigation continued even after Theodore Jr.'s death, as prosecutors worked to dismantle the remaining elements of the criminal network that had operated for over half a century. Asset forfeiture proceedings began against the Whitmore estate, with prosecutors seeking to recover hundreds of millions in criminal proceeds that had been laundered through legitimate investments. Catherine Whitmore had finally achieved her goal. The truth had surfaced, and the criminal empire built on her family's name was crashing down around those who had betrayed her trust and taken her life. The legal proceedings that followed Catherine Whitmore's murder case became one of the most complex prosecutions in New York history. With the main perpetrator dead and many of the conspirators having passed away during the 25-year delay, prosecutors faced the challenge of delivering justice for crimes that had been perfectly concealed for over 2 decades. District Attorney Patricia Hernandez, who took personal charge of the Whitmore prosecution, found herself dealing with a case that stretched across multiple jurisdictions and involved crimes spanning 5 decades. The evidence Catherine had gathered was comprehensive, but proving criminal liability for living defendants required connecting 25-year-old evidence to contemporary legal standards. The first breakthrough came with the cooperation of James Morrison, the former deckhand who had participated in Catherine's murder. Facing life imprisonment at age 64, Morrison agreed to provide detailed testimony about the criminal organization in exchange for a reduced sentence. His revelations provided investigators with the final pieces of the puzzle that had eluded them for 25 years. Morrison revealed that Catherine's murder had been planned for months before the cruise. Theodore Jr. had become increasingly concerned about his daughter's interference in family business and had consulted with criminal associates about eliminating her. The birthday cruise was specifically designed to provide an alibi and a location where Catherine could disappear without immediate detection. The plan had been executed with clinical precision. Catherine's dinner on her final night had been drugged with a paralytic agent that left her conscious but unable to move or speak. After the other passengers had gone to sleep, Morrison and Torres had moved her unconscious body to the yacht's tender and transported her to shore, where a third man, whom Morrison knew only as Vincent, had been waiting with a rental car. Vincent, Morrison testified, had strangled Catherine in the back seat of the car while Morrison and Torres watched. Her body was then transported to the pre-dug grave in Connecticut, where she was buried along with evidence that could connect her death to the family's criminal enterprise. The entire operation had taken less than 4 hours, and Catherine Whitmore had vanished as if she had never existed. The search for Vincent became a priority for investigators. Catherine's evidence included photographs of meetings between her father and several unidentified men, and facial recognition technology eventually identified Vincent as Vincent Caruso, a known enforcer for the Genovese crime family who had died in a federal prison in 2003. Michael Torres proved less cooperative than Morrison, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence of his participation. His trial became a showcase for Catherine's evidence, with prosecutors playing her secret recordings and displaying the documents she had hidden in the safe. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before convicting Torres of first-degree murder and conspiracy charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The corruption cases proved even more complex to prosecute. Judge Martin Rosenberg, now 81 years old, claimed that his cognitive decline prevented him from understanding the charges against him. However, medical evaluation found him competent to stand trial, and Catherine's recordings provided unambiguous evidence of his criminal activities. He was convicted of racketeering and bribery charges and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. State Senator Patricia Morrison had died in 2008, but her criminal activities had enriched her family for decades. Federal prosecutors filed civil forfeiture actions against her estate, ultimately recovering over $12 million in assets that could be traced to bribes from the Whitmore organization. The investigation into the historical murders, documented in Theodore Sr.'s ledger, proved more challenging, but ultimately successful in several cases. The death of Coast Guard investigator Thomas Kelly in 1973, originally ruled an accidental drowning, was reclassified as homicide after new evidence emerged. Kelly's family, who had suspected foul play for 40 years, finally received confirmation that their loved one had died trying to expose criminal activity. The financial impact of the Whitmore investigation reached far beyond the criminal prosecutions. The family's assets, accumulated over 3 generations, were systematically seized through civil forfeiture proceedings. The Fifth Avenue penthouse, the Long Island estate, the art collection, and even the yacht where Catherine's evidence had been hidden were all sold at auction, with proceeds going to victim compensation funds and law enforcement agencies. Catherine's own estate, held in trust since her disappearance, became the subject of complex legal proceedings. Her will, hidden in the safe along with her other evidence, left her entire inheritance to organizations fighting drug trafficking and supporting victims of violent crime. The estate, worth over $50 million after 25 years of investment growth, became the foundation for the Catherine Whitmore Justice Foundation, which funds cold case investigations and victim advocacy programs. The surviving members of the Whitmore family, distant cousins and relatives who had no knowledge of the criminal enterprise, found themselves dealing with the destruction of a family name that had once commanded respect in New York society. Many changed their surnames and moved to other parts of the country, seeking to escape the shadow of crimes they had not committed but would forever be associated with their family legacy. The case also prompted significant changes in law enforcement procedures. The FBI established new protocols for investigating disappearances among wealthy families, recognizing that financial resources and social connections could be used to obstruct justice rather than facilitate it. Maritime security procedures were also enhanced, with new requirements for yacht registration and monitoring systems that would make it much more difficult to conceal criminal activities aboard private vessels. 25 years after her death, Catherine Whitmore had achieved something that seemed impossible when she was alive. She had brought down the criminal empire that had consumed her family and destroyed her life. Her courage in gathering evidence before her death had ensured that justice, however delayed, would ultimately prevail. October 15, 2025. 38 years after Catherine Whitmore's murder, her grave in Woodlawn Cemetery has become an unlikely pilgrimage site for those seeking justice in cold cases across America. The simple headstone, reading Catherine Elizabeth Whitmore, 1965-1987, Truth Always Surfaces, draws visitors who leave flowers, notes, and sometimes evidence of their own unsolved cases, hoping that Catherine's spirit might guide their search for answers. The Catherine Whitmore Justice Foundation, established with her estate, has funded the resolution of over 200 cold cases across the United States. The foundation's motto, taken from Catherine's final letter, reads, "The dead don't stay buried when justice demands they speak." It has become a rallying cry for families dealing with unsolved disappearances and murders, a reminder that time doesn't diminish the power of truth. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who broke open the case with the discovery of the hidden safe, has become one of the country's leading experts on cold case investigations. She frequently speaks at law enforcement conferences about the Whitmore case, emphasizing that the most important evidence often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to look beyond the obvious explanations. Catherine Whitmore didn't just solve her own murder, Rodriguez often tells audiences. She showed us that victims can be their own best advocates, even from beyond the grave. The evidence she gathered and preserved became the foundation for one of the largest organized crime prosecutions in American history. The ripple effects of Catherine's evidence continue to generate new cases and investigations. In 2023, Colombian authorities used information from the Whitmore files to arrest the aging leadership of a drug cartel that had operated for over 50 years. Brazilian police closed 3 cold cases from the 1980s using shipping records that Catherine had hidden in her evidence cache. The international cooperation sparked by her case has become a model for cross-border investigations into organized crime. The yacht, Prosperity, where Catherine spent her final hours and hid the evidence that would eventually bring her killers to justice, was purchased by the FBI and converted into a training facility for maritime law enforcement. The hidden compartment where the safe was discovered has been preserved as a memorial, visited by thousands of law enforcement officers who come to understand how creative criminals can be and how persistent investigators must be in response. Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's best friend who was aboard the yacht during those final tragic days, became a prominent victims' rights advocate. She established a scholarship fund for students studying forensic science, ensuring that future generations would have the tools to solve the cases that seem impossible. Catherine taught me that friendship doesn't end with death, Mitchell says. She trusted us to tell her story, and even though it took 25 years, we finally kept that promise. The case has also had a profound impact on how wealthy families are investigated when crimes occur. The Whitmore Protocol, adopted by law enforcement agencies nationwide, requires additional scrutiny when investigating disappearances or deaths among individuals with significant financial resources. The protocol recognizes that wealth can be used to obstruct justice, and that investigators must look beyond surface appearances when dealing with powerful families. James Morrison, the former deckhand who cooperated with authorities, served 8 years in prison before being released on parole in 2020. He has since dedicated his life to speaking at schools and community centers about the consequences of criminal choices. "I took a young woman's life for money," he tells audiences, but Catherine Whitmore had the last word. She made sure that everyone who participated in her murder would eventually face justice. The Connecticut forest where Catherine's body was buried has been preserved as a memorial garden. Her remains were moved to the family plot in Woodlawn Cemetery, where she rests beside her parents, who died never knowing what had happened to their daughter. The memorial garden features a plaque with Catherine's own words, "Truth may be buried, but it always finds a way to surface." Theodore Whitmore, Jr. His former mansion on Long Island was purchased by the state and converted into a center for missing persons investigations. The irony was intentional. The home of a man who had orchestrated his daughter's disappearance became a place dedicated to finding other missing people and bringing them home to their families. The case has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies, examining how organized crime can infiltrate legitimate businesses and corrupt entire families. Catherine's story has become a cautionary tale about the price of silence and the power of evidence, to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The FBI's Cold Case Unit, established partially in response to the Whitmore investigation, has solved over 1,000 previously unsolved murders and disappearances. The unit's success rate has inspired other countries to establish similar programs, creating an international network of investigators dedicated to ensuring that no case is ever truly closed until the truth emerges. Perhaps most importantly, Catherine Whitmore's case has given hope to thousands of families dealing with unsolved disappearances. Her story proves that even when authorities give up, even when cases are officially closed, the truth can still surface decades later. Evidence preserved, memories maintained, and the relentless pursuit of justice can overcome even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following Catherine Whitmore's story. We'll see you in the next video. On quiet nights at Woodlawn Cemetery, visitors sometimes report seeing a young woman in a white dress walking among the headstones, as if checking to ensure that the dead are properly remembered and their stories properly told. Whether it's Catherine Whitmore or simply the power of suggestion, The sightings remind us that some spirits refuse to rest until justice is finally, completely served. Truth, as Catherine knew, always finds a way to surface, no matter how deep it's buried or how long it takes to emerge into the light.